All right, guys, welcome back to Absurd Automotive. Today we are going to be doing two 1974s with the 12-valve Cummins conversion in them. I don't know if you guys recognize this truck, but this is a truck that brought our truck, Miracle, back from paint about 2 months ago. So we're just going to go through and compare engines, transmissions, axles, and kind of the different swaps that you can do on these trucks and see their pros and cons in each one. All right, so these two fummins here behind me are very different and very similar all at the same time. So we're gonna go over the engine bays and kind of show you what the difference is between the two trucks in just the engine bay, and then we'll start going through the truck and kind of show random differences and similarities, and we'll kind of go over the pros and cons of the trucks. All right, starting with my truck, because you guys have seen this engine bay about 1,000 times. We're gonna get kind of technical. Not really. This is as technical as I'll ever get on a YouTube channel. But we have a non-intercooled VE pump 12-valve. Pretty much stock. I have 50 over injectors in it, so it doesn't make a lot of horsepower. Not anything crazy. But the big difference here is I have a single battery setup with electric fans on the original 1991 Dodge Radiator, and all I had to do to fit this was cut off the fins, and I'll show you what I'm talking about with the fins in a minute here. But you guys can also see how thick my front frame is. Nothing really crazy going on over here, but from the side view, there's our VE pump from the side view. Not very big compared to the one we're about to go see. This is still the original brake booster and brake setup out of the truck. The only thing I changed was we have an electric brake booster. That way, if the engine shuts off, I still have brake, like power brakes. So, you know, from safety reasons. And right here, you guys can see that is my cooler for the automatic transmission. So now you guys have kind of got the overview of what is all in here. There's nothing super special about any of this going on. You guys can see the brackets. He has the same brackets in that truck. They're just online, and you can go to like any fummins swap or Cummins swap thing, and you can find stuff that'll fit just about any truck you really want. Kind of. They're just kind of generic big plates. But yeah, so we're gonna go over the other engine bay, and I'll show you guys all the differences between my truck here and that one. My buddy's truck is a little taller, so you're gonna have to work with me here. We have a P pump intercooled Cummins. You can see that the intercooler is up here. He kind of had to modify the grills and other stuff to fit this. And you guys can see the fins that I'm talking about. These fins were on my truck, but I cut them off. He actually notched the whole front of his frame here to fit the cooler in there, to fit his mechanical fan. I don't have a mechanical fan, I have the electric. And I sometimes have a little bit of a problem cooling my engine off. He never does. So we'll kind of jump over here. He's got the 2 battery setup, 1 and 2. A lot of guys run this 2 battery setup. I've never had an issue with running just 1. So you guys can see over here, the intercooled turbo comes up, and you don't got a lot of space down there. It looks like not a whole bunch, but I didn't even talk about the downpipe either. I guess we can go back if I want to. But the downpipe here, he's got a 4-inch downpipe. I think I only have a 3-inch downpipe, but that's, you know, not that big of a deal. This is more what I'm interested in. I've always thought about doing this, but this right here is a hydraulic brake booster. So I actually am really interested in this. I've never done it. I've talked to him a little bit about this. This is super cool. It's way more braking power than the original brake booster, but he also has a completely different axle setup than I do. So when we go talk about the axles, I'll talk about the brakes a little bit more. But that is a hydraulic braking system, not the air brake booster that I have. He has onboard air. He's got more relays in here than I do. He's got a whole little relay box over there. He's got some fancy stuff in here. I'm not that fancy. But yeah, that's his engine bay. The only main difference is just remember the P pump and the intercooled. That's the main difference between his engine and my engine. He actually has 100 horse over injectors in here, and I've only got 50, so not super crazy. All right, coming into my cab, you guys can see that I have the digital dash. It is not a manual, clearly, but I have this right here, which is my transmission controller, which I will talk more about in a minute. But yeah, that is a pretty simplistic looking setup. Nothing super crazy with it, but Now I'll go over and look at his truck. All right, and coming into his truck, you guys can see he's got the manual transmission, all the gauges for all his air ride and other things. He still has the analog gauges. Nothing super different about the truck other than a little bit of looks. Still pretty nice looking truck inside of there. All right, coming to the axles and wheels and ride height and all of that, you guys can see he's got some height on me, but I have 33s. He has 35s. You come under here, and I still have the original Dana 44 and the 4 9-inch in the back. Custom drive shafts. I still have the leaf springs up front. Coming over here, he obviously has a lot of different stuff going on here. He has the coil over Super Duty, I think they're 05s, 05 Super Duty axles under here. Obviously, you can see there's been some modifications to the frame to fit the 05 axles. I think he said the rear end just bolts right up, still leaf spring, but he actually has air ride on these too, so that's pretty nice. But both custom drive shafts on both vehicles. Nothing's really getting around that. You can't really avoid that. But yeah, the axles make a lot of bit of difference on weight. Mine can only handle about maybe 10,000 pounds. His can handle probably 15,000. All right, jumping into the pros and the cons of these two trucks. So when we talk about this yellow and brown fummins over here, this thing's got 05 Super Duty axles under it. It has no roll to the body. So that is one thing that beats this truck all day. It is an old 70s suspension. It's got a lot of body roll to it, kind of. Like when you take a turn, it kind of rolls. And I don't know what it is. It's old. I've replaced a lot of parts on this. I can't figure it out. Just going to chalk up to old truck stuff. This truck over here is a lot lighter. I mean, like, a lot. This thing's got a huge, really heavy flatbed on there. It's got way bigger axles under it. It's got a lot more stuff on it. It's heavier. So the fuel mileage is not as great, but it can also haul a lot more. This thing, again, maybe 10,000 pounds, but you're getting like 20, 22 on fuel mileage. This thing, you're maybe getting like 18, 19. So there's a lot of differences in like the driving versus the fuel mileage and the hauling. I noticed kind of a con on this truck too, even with filming. I haven't even worked on this truck at all, but I've noticed that like it seems very, very tall. Like this truck's really tall. Which, I mean, if you lift any truck, it's going to be like that. So that's not really this fummins swap particularly, but I've noticed that like with this one, it's just hard to get up and in stuff versus mine. You come over here and it's pretty much at my waist height. I can get in here, work on stuff really easy. I can still get in here, and I'm probably like 5'9". So getting into the engine bay is still really easy versus that one with the big 35s and the Super Duty axles is kind of hard to get into. Like, I mean, this big bull bar on the front, you're reaching over. I'm assuming that probably gets really old really fast. But other than that, I mean, these are pretty much the same. The transmission is something I want to talk about. I know I mentioned something about my controller. So, getting into transmissions. That's like the biggest decision when building these trucks to make is the decision of a transmission. Transmissions are always going to be kind of a hard thing to make decisions on because it's a Dodge. Dodges, for some reason, just are known for eating transmissions. When I was putting this truck together, someone recommended the E4OD because it fit between the frame rails. It was super easy to install, and I had the transmission controller, and there was a bunch of fancy stuff I could do with it. Great. He put the ZF5 5-speed manual in there and has no electronics connected to that thing. I mean, I'm sure there is for like the speedo and stuff, but nothing for just controlling the train. He shifts, and the smoothness of his shifts are just on him shifting. There's no transmission controller trying to get this to work right and blah, blah, blah. So I like that for putting it together. But for driving, I'm sure that driving that thing's not a pain in the butt, but it's just that heavy clutch. I'm sure that's not exactly fun when you're stuck in traffic or anything like that. But the problem I'm having with my automatic, if you are going to go the automatic route, I recommend getting it tuned professionally by a shop, because no matter how much I tune it, no matter how much I mess with it, it's just not, it's not right. Something's always not, it's not perfect. Like it's good. It works great. It's just not perfect. And the other part of that too is the transmission controller that I showed you. When I bought that transmission controller, it was like $300 something, and it came with the kit, and like I put everything together and it worked flawlessly. But apparently, when I looked it up recently, because because someone asked me about this and I was trying to do this video. That controller is, I think it was $800 now. $800 for just the ECU little controller for the transmission. That is insane. And I wanted to keep this truck as simplistic as possible. And honestly, like looking back, I wish I would have done a manual, because now if that controller breaks, that is an $800 ticket coming out of my pocket to fix that. That is insane. Versus where this, I mean, if the transmission breaks, the transmission breaks. I mean, you're replacing the whole thing. Versus this, there's so many like parts and pieces that could be broken before the transmission is actually broken. Like there's a lot of other little things in front of that. So I don't know. That's kind of up to you guys if you like the automatic transmission or the manual transmission. Some people really like automatics. Some people really like manuals. So yeah, you know, you got a lot of options when you're picking your transmission for a Cummins swap. You got, you know, Allison's, you've got the Dodge transmissions to keep in there. You've got the NB 4500s people really like. Those things are really sought after. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with transmission wise, and it all depends on application too. Like if you want a manual, go for it. You want an automatic, you got plenty of options. Like there's a lot there. I will say I was thinking about doing an Allison in my truck when I was putting mine together, because that was what everybody told me to do. I'm not sure if I'm glad I didn't go with it or not, because I've never really messed with an Allison. I've seen one of these setups before, but not in a Cummins. I've only seen this in a motorhome, which is like a 20,000 pound motorhome. It had a 12-valve Cummins, same motor that I have, and it had a little Allison behind it. I say little, that thing was huge. But it seemed to work really well. So I'm not gonna crap on Allison because they are a really good transmission, but they are just so good that they're too expensive for most people. I know I had one transmission, someone was trying to say that I needed to give them 10 grand for it. And it wasn't like a built transmission coming new from a shop. This was like somebody in their backyard telling me I needed to pay them 10 grand for an Allison transmission. You're out of your mind. So back to the pros and cons of these swaps, and I wanted to give a visual. I know I talked about it a little bit, but I kind of wanted to give a visual of like what I like and dislike about swapping my older truck. And I've talked to my buddy about his too, and he kind of had the same complaints and the same like raves about the thing that I did. So pros and cons. So we'll start with the biggest reason that we swapped these trucks, which was fuel mileage. So fuel mileage on these trucks, when they have the old V8 in them, were really poor. Like they would get like 6 to 8 miles to a gallon. You know, they'd only have a 15-gallon tank, so you could barely get anywhere with the truck. So fuel mileage was really big. So with that being said, we're gonna go to a con. With these trucks being so custom built, and us being in Alaska, we've both complained about nobody else can work on the truck but us. And that's not like hey, these things are so complicated that no one else can figure them out, because they're really simple trucks. Like if you look in that engine bay, there's not a whole lot going on. And if you understand diesels, that is one of the easiest diesel motors to work on. So there's not a lot going on there. But the problem is like parts. If we break one of our custom parts that fit up to that, I know he said he actually machined parts for his truck. I never did. I bought kits. So I've talked about this earlier with the transmission controller and stuff. Like I can't just go to a store and get a transmission controller for that truck. I have to order it offline. Being in Alaska, it takes days, and the price tag too. You know, $800 for just an ECU on that thing, which electronic controller unit for the transmission. Like that's insane. So maintenance is a really big issue. It's expensive. It is hard to get parts for it. I'm not gonna say hard. It's difficult to get parts for it, and no shops can work on it. So maintenance is kind of a con. So maintenance is a con. We're gonna go back up to the pros. So even though this truck is super custom and you know no one else can work on it, if you are mechanically inclined and you can function somewhat or find someone to help you learn enough to build one of these trucks, it's got a lot of perks to it. So performance is enhanced tenfold. Reliability is enhanced tenfold. My truck is built to be more of a reliable driving road trip kind of truck. Like, I drive that truck up and down Alaska. I've drove it across the country. I've done a lot of things with that truck, and I've put a lot of miles on that truck. And a lot of them have been highway miles. I'm not going to call it a pavement princess, but you know, it's been on the highway a lot. These Alaskan highways are kind of rough, but it's still a highway. So it's not like I'm driving this thing out in a field and expecting it to hold up. But with swapping out that 460, you have the options of putting bigger turbos on the 12 valve, bigger injectors, turning up the pump. Like, I think you could probably get, with turbos, injectors, and a pump turn up, you could probably get 500, 600 horse on those trucks and still be somewhat reliable. As far as I've heard, I mean, I have had no issues with that motor, and I've heard that the 12 valve is the holy grail motor. I haven't had anything where I disagree with that statement so far. We'll kind of see what happens. But yeah, performance and reliability has been increased tenfold since you swapped in that new Cummins and transmission and got rid of that old C6 or the old Granny 4s and the 460s or the 351s or whatever. Once you get rid of those older motors and older transmissions and you go to that new stuff, it's really hard to go back. So, cons. One of the things, I know we said better fuel mileage. That's just awesome. It's great. You know, we get 20 miles to the gallon now, but diesel is more expensive than gas by a lot sometimes. And you have to add additives sometimes and other stuff like that. So fuel prices, or fuel costs, I'm going to cost that fuel cost. Fuel costs for these kind of swaps is a lot compared to just driving the 460 with gas. You just put gas in it, you go. It's a little bit cheaper than diesel, but I mean, the consumption rate, there's so many things that you could compare there. But I'm just going to say it is a con because diesel is more expensive and all the additives that you can put in there to protect your truck. I'm in Alaska, so I don't have to put a ton of additives in the truck to keep it running. But I've noticed when it's like -20 and -30 out, so like you Midwestern people or Northern guys, you'll have that issue where your stuff will clog up, and you'll have that on normal diesels. So like doing a swap, you gotta accept that that's gonna happen. So back up to our pros. Our last pro is going to be the weight capacity, towing capacity, whatever you want to call it, of the trucks. With building custom trucks like that and taking an old truck and modifying it and putting the Cummins in there, you have the option of almost doubling what you can haul in the weight. So I know my buddy, his truck was an I don't know if it was an F100 or an F150. You don't quote me on that when he did the swap. But the truck did not haul a lot. Like, you're maybe just under that 10,000 mark if you're lucky with that. If it was an F100, you're not even close. But when he did the swap, he put those 05 Super Duty axles under there, bigger suspension, the coilovers in the front. You know, he did all of that drivetrain hype up, get it going a lot more. You know, he's probably pushing, you know, a lot more. Like, I don't know what he's pushing for horsepower. He's pushing more horsepower than me. And the cool thing about that is his weight capacity for that truck is now almost 15,000 pounds that he can tow. And that's quite a bit for a truck. So if you wanted to, you can really hype it up. Mine, you know, you could shoot yourself in the foot too. I didn't know this at the time. But even though, I mean, I kind of did, but, you know, just being young and stupid and not knowing stuff, you know, I can't just throw a big drivetrain in there and have these little tiny, you know, F-150 axles under there and expect to be able to haul more. Now, if I changed out the suspension and changed out the axles, I could probably get up to that 15,000 pound mark if I really wanted to, but I don't really need to either. But yeah, towing capacity is definitely a big pro when you're going from the old mechanics to the new mechanics, and if you want to do the suspension change, like, your limits are pretty much endless on what you want to do. Obviously, things have a limit, but you can push those limits pretty good if you really wanted to. So, one of the biggest things that I disliked about doing my swap was the rust. It has nothing to do with the Cummins motor. It's got nothing to do with the drivetrain or the frame or any of that. It's just the body rust. So if you want to have these older trucks, you got to deal with the old truck problems. Like, you think you're going to put all these nice parts in these trucks and they're going to be new trucks. No, you still got to deal with rust. You still got to deal with all the rust control. You still got to make sure, I painted my truck, so I have a few years where I don't got to worry about a ton of rust problems. But my buddy, he's running an older truck where it was never repainted, it was never taken care of really, and now it's starting to have rust issues. So when you're swapping your truck, just be prepared. If you're gonna use an older body and an older frame and older stuff, you're gonna have rust issues. Like, it's just gonna be there. Just accept it. So just be prepared for that. Like, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it is a con, and it is something that gets in your way when you're doing these builds. All right, and that's pretty much the meat and potatoes of the good and bad, the pros and the cons, and kind of the reason we swapped it too. Like, I kind of gave a reason. I mean, this is the reason we did it for the most part. Really, this one right here. This was like our big reason. That 20 miles to the gallon is really great compared to 8 miles you got with that old 460 or the 351 you had in those trucks. And I know some of these guys build these shop-built crazy fummins that are getting $250,000 on the Barrett-Jackson floor, which is insane. If you want to look that up, just Barrett-Jackson fummins. One of those things sold for like $250,000 almost. It was insane. So with that, I want to know what the price of our truck is. Like, I don't have a single clue what that truck is worth, because I have seen just stock Fords like that, the extended cab Ford with the air conditioning and all that fun stuff, go for like $20,000 to $30,000, which is insane. And the thing about it is I don't know what that truck is worth, because I come and swapped it. I don't know if it raises the value a bunch or it lowers it. So I just kind of want to see what that truck's worth more for insurance reasons. But, if someone hits the truck, I want to get what the truck's worth, stuff like that. But I'm just curious what you guys think that the Cummins swap does. Does it raise the value of these trucks, or does it lower it? So, just leave your comment below, and thank you guys for watching. I always appreciate it. And big shout out to my buddy for letting us do the comparison. It was a really cool opportunity that a lot of people don't get to do. So thank you guys for watching. I always appreciate it, and I will see you guys next time.